Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson. Today's episode, Bluff Catcher, for November 11th, 2008. As always, you can email the show at cashplays@pokerroad.com. Leave a voicemail over at 877-836-ROAD. Give me a Skype at bart.hanson, and check out those Poker Road forums at pokerroad.com/forums. Before I get into the meat of the show, I kind of want to make an announcement. I don't know if any of you guys are members of the PPA, but they threw out like a flash bulletin a couple of days ago regarding the Bush administration is trying to basically now make the rules about the enforcement of the UIGEA, which is coming up, and it seems like they want to do that before they exit out of their administration. I want to urge everyone to go to the Federal Reserve website and fill out a complaint. Now, hopefully, when this show goes up, there'll be a link there on Poker. I'm trying to get it up on the Cash Plays website. I just think that, you know, you guys out there who love poker, love online poker, you know, every little bit helps. And you know, the great thing about this country is that sometimes, you know, if you get enough people to voice their opinions, it actually makes a difference. So head over to federalreserve.gov and fill out a electronic comment form regarding the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. And again, hopefully I'll have a link up there on the Cash Plays website. But I mean, obviously the UIGEA has been around for over 2 years now, but this is really where it comes down to a point where it becomes very important as to how they want to enforce the rules. And actually, outside of the poker community, there are people who are opposed to this too, especially in the banking community. Because if you can imagine banks having to, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but I know that, you know, certain types of money transfers are coded, or they might actually all be coded. And basically what banks are going to have to do if they want to enforce this thing, is when a transaction is coded as an online gaming transaction, it's basically supposed to be not allowed. But you can imagine, you know, like a huge bank dealing with, you know, millions of dollars in electronic transfers per day, and now they have to sift through transfers of like $500 that are to, you know, electronic gaming. You know, they are complaining that they just don't have the resources, and they probably don't, especially in the state of the banking industry and how it is right now. For me, it hurts. Obviously, this act hurts because of the television broadcast stuff that I do. I mean, if the market becomes closed off any more than it already has to Americans, I mean, you've seen how TV poker has basically gone down the tubes. There's just a lack of advertisers out there. You know, yeah, you've got Full Tilt and Poker Stars, but, you know, you can't really put on a poker show and have other sites advertise because there's no market. And, you know, these sites want to concentrate on the European market. So, again, I want to urge everybody to head over there and check that out. Now, this week's episode, again, Bluff Catcher and bluff catching. I've picked up so much, again, from playing basically what I consider a relatively low limit of 5-10 no limit live at the Commerce over the last few weeks, that I just have accumulated just a wealth of things that I see going wrong at these limits. And I'm going to assume that it's pretty much the same, you know, at the 2-5 level, at the 5-10 level, everywhere else in the country. You know, the games might be a little bit tougher. Who knows? But bear with me here. One of the most important things that I continue to see are people not realizing that with the given action in a hand, their hand is now a bluff catcher regardless of the strength of their hand. And I'm going to give several examples, but basically the concept of what I'm, you know, trying to get at is that if you have a hand that is, let's say, the absolute second nuts on the river, and with the given action, you know that your villain is only betting with the nuts or is only betting as a bluff which in this case, I just see it so much. It's just polarized. I mean, that's exactly what happens at these levels. It even happens up to the 10-20 level. Remember, this is not like what Smolius was talking about a couple weeks ago. People aren't sometimes betting for value hands that you beat. So you've got the second nuts, and a guy either has the nuts or he has a bluff. Your hand strength makes no difference. Your second nut hand is the equivalent to the nut non-pair. And I say that because when you get into flush draws and stuff, people might be bluffing with an ace-high flush draw. So if you call them with king-high, you might lose. But people just don't understand it. And I see it. I see crazy stuff that goes on. Like when you got 4 liners to a straight, and someone's got trips or someone's got 2 pair, and they're like, well, I had to call. I have to call. I've got 2 pair. Well, no, you don't. It's absolutely amazing to me. So here we go. We're giving you a couple examples here. Let's say that you raised pre-flop with Jack 10, and somebody called you. And again, position, stack size, it doesn't matter. This is just all about what happens at the results of the hand. The board comes out Jack 10-3 with 2 diamonds. All right, great. You got top 2 pair. Bet, and you get called. Draw heavy board. Guy might have diamonds, whatever. Turns an offsuit 5 of clubs, bringing 2 diamonds and 2 clubs on board. You bet he calls again. Okay. River now is the 7 of clubs. Backdoor flush gets there. 8-9 gets there. You bet or you check whatever line you want to take, and you get raised. Say you bet and you get raised. Oh, you throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I've got top 2, I have to call. Well, really? Jack 10, 3, 5, 7. Again, 8-9 gets there. Backdoor clubs get there. You don't have the jack of clubs in your hand, and the flop top pair does not have a club. So the guy could have, obviously he could make a jack high flush. He could have made 8-9. Now, my contention here is that Jack 10 is absolutely the equivalent to Ace Jack in this spot. There really is no difference. It's the equivalent to Ace Jack, it's the equivalent to Queens, it's the equivalent to Kings or Aces. This guy is raising here with a made backdoor flush, 8-9, or an absolute bluff. Now, I was going to say use this example because this hand actually happened. Excuse me. I was watching this hand a couple days ago where a guy had a set of 10s. And if you want to take it to an extreme example, a case can be made here that Jack 10 is the same as 3 jacks against a relatively passive opponent with this given information. Now, sometimes you might see a guy slow play like a set. If you've got like a thin value better on the river, maybe he's value betting some sort of 2 pair. But the other point about this is people sometimes find excuses to call, and they try to invent hands that they have. I mean, you can turn that around and say, let's say that you have a set of 3s on that board. In a limped pot, bet, get called, turns a 5, bet, get called, river's a 7, bet, get raised. Again, there really is absolutely, a set of 3s is the equivalent to 1 pair in that spot. If a guy had slow played Jack 10 on that spot, he's not raising the river. I don't think when 8, 9, and clubs get there. So again, you have to look at the relative value of your hand with the given action and the cards that have come out on the turn and the river and the overall board texture. It makes no difference of your own hand strength. Let's go to another example. Example B. Let's say you're getting frisky and you raise it up with 5, 6 of hearts. And the board comes out King, King, 9, which is obviously a good board to continuation bet heads up. Guy checks, you bet, he calls. A couple spades out there. So you're thinking to yourself, well, this guy could easily be slow playing a king. He could have spades. Who knows? Turns a 5. He checks, you pick up a pair, you check behind, possibly intending to call an offsuit river. Maybe the guy has missed spades. River's a 5. Now the board's King, King, 9, 5, 5. You've got 5, 6 of hearts. You have the bottom end of the full house. Now the guy bets. You look and you say, well, I've got a 5 here. I absolutely have I have a full house. It's Zebo theorem, which means no one really folds a full house. I have to call. What is the difference here between 5, 6 and let's say 8, 9? What's the difference here between 5, 6 and pocket 6s? What's the difference here between 5, 6 and ace high? And I don't think there is any difference with the river here between you having a 5 and you having ace high here for 2 pair on the board with an ace. Because against typical competition, a guy is never going to bet like pocket 8s there for value. And again, some people would say, well, yeah, that happens sometimes in my games. Again, in a tougher game, yes, but I want people to get out of the habit of trying to invent a hand that they can beat. So when you have 5, 6 here, with this given action, I think what would be going through my mind is I have the exact same thing as ace high. Now, on a board like this, you might be willing to call because the spades didn't get there. If you made your decision on the turn that you're going to check it back and you're going to look at the river, and if it's offsuit, not completing the draw, you're going to call anyways. But the point of it is that the fact that you have the bottom part of the full house makes absolutely no difference. None whatsoever. Absolutely none. Let's go to another example. Flop comes out ace, ace, 4. Let's say you've limped in with ace, deuce. You bet, get called. Turn's a 3. You bet, get called. River is a 6. Ace, ace, 4, 3, 6. With no flush draws. You have ace, deuce. You bet the river, or you check the river, intending to check call. You get raised, or you have a decision to make to call if you check. Ace, deuce here. What is this the equivalent to? You cannot beat any ace. Obviously, there's a wheel out there. And there really are no draws. In terms of hand strength, your hand is really no better, in this case, to probably pocket 7s. If somebody shows some strength at the end. Now, again, if you want to stretch it, and a guy might make a value bet with pocket 9s here after calling, but it's just so rare. So ace, deuce here. Again, a bluff catcher. At these levels, against loose passive competition, you're beat. Here's a great example. Example D. Board comes out queen, queen, 10. You have king, queen, and you've raised. You bet, guy calls. Great. You got 3 queens with the king kicker. Turn is a 9. Board is semi-draw heavy. It was queen, queen, 10, rainbow. Turns an offsuit 9. So now anything with a jack or a straight draw on it, maybe you put the guy on a jack, jack 10, something like that. You bet again. He calls again. Queen, queen, 10, 9. Again, you have king, queen. River is an 8. Now, there's a one-liner out there to a straight. Now he bets. Now let's take a look at this board. There's no queen that you can beat with his range. If he has ace, queen, you lose. If he has king, queen, you chop. If he has queen, jack, you lose. If he has queen, 10, you lose. If he has queen, 9, you lose. If he has queen, 8, you lose. And, weaker queens are out of his range. If he has any jack, you lose. So the fact that you have king, queen makes absolutely no difference here. Queen, queen, 10, 9, 8. King, queen is the equivalent here of pocket kings, pocket aces. There is no difference here between having trips and having an overpair. Against a bet, this is only a bluff catcher. And with this given action, this hand should not be good, king, queen. But you look down and you say, well, I've got trip queens, I have to call. Remember, look at the relative value of your hand against the given action, against the given line of a villain, not what you actually hold. Example E. Flop comes out queen, jack, 3 with 2 spades. Turn is a 5. River is a 5 of spades. You had raised it up with 4 deuce of spades. You had been getting frisky. Bet the flop with a flush draw. Took a card when you hit open-ended on the turn, and now made a flush at the end. Guy checks to you on the river. Or let's say that you're out of position. You bet, and he gets raised. Or the river, you bet, and you get check raised on the river. And I don't want to confuse people. Let's say you raise it up in position. The guy calls. You bet out on queen jack 3. Bet your flush draw. He calls. Turns a 5. You take a card. River's a 5. He now checks the river. You bet your spade flush for value. Now he check raises you, which is just an unbelievable play at 5-10. I've never seen anybody check raise bluff. And look at your hand. What is 4 deuce of spades here? It's the lowest flush. The board is paired. Is there any difference here between you having 4 deuce of spades and you having ace queen? Is there any difference here between you having 4 deuce of spades and ace king, no pair, where the guy might make a move trying to represent the flush if he missed king 10? What's the difference here between the lowest flush and the non-pair with this given action? And my contention is that from what I've seen at these smaller to mid games against semi-predictable opponents, there is no difference. Absolutely none. And get the idea out of your head that you have some sort of made hand, because that made hand is exactly the same as a ton of other weaker hands, which are just bluff catchers. I want to move on to kind of another segment that I've noticed in these games. And that is people showing sudden strength against obvious scare cards. The best example of this is, let's say the flop. Let's say that you've raised with like ace king or ace queen, and the board comes out 9 deuce 6 with a couple of diamonds. Guy checks to you, check it back. Kind of coordinated board. The 50-51, I mean, medium like type of board to possibly continuation bet. Let's say there's 3-way actions. There's 2 guys in the hand. So you're like, you know what, this hits these guys, draw heavy. I'm going to check this back. Okay. Checked around. Turns an ace. All right. Like I said, you've got ace king or whatever, ace queen. Check to you again. Now you bet, and you get check raised. That play shows so much strength that you are almost never good at these levels and at the levels that most of you play out there. When somebody shows strength on the turn after the flop has been played weakly, specifically when the turn brings an ace or a king or a queen, they are, basically showing extreme strength. Also be wary of the fact where if the board comes out 9 deuce 6 and an ace comes out on the turn, when a guy bets into you on the turn, let's say with that 3-way action, the guy in first position now bets the turn. You call, let's say the river's a 10, and now he bets again. 2 bets. I would almost say 99.9% of the time here, you are not good with ace king. Because look what you are representing by checking behind that flop. Exactly what you have. 2 big overcards. You're usually not going to check with an overpair on that board. So when he is betting into you, when the turn card absolutely smacks what you are supposed to have, then obviously he has got something big. And again, poker is not 100% of everything here. But I would make the, contention that he's got at least aces up there, by the end of the hand. You can actually turn that around and sometimes make a play, and again, a very, very advanced play, and this is usually for the higher levels. And I've done it, and it's worked a lot, where you get a board like that, and you're the guy that's out of position, and the pre-flop raiser checks it back. Okay? And now the turn is an ace or a king. And now you go for a check raise on the turn with basically total air after he bets. Because he's either betting the scare card and he actually doesn't have anything, or if he does have anything, it's very difficult for his hand to stand two big bets here. A check raise on the turn and a bet on the river. Again, because if you're the guy out of position, you are playing back against his hand. And his hand should be ace, king, or ace, queen there with the given action. So the fact that you're not scared of ace, king, or ace, queen should send warning signals off to that guy. And again, if you're in that spot, it should send warning signals off to you. But if you want to make an advanced play, you can make that play because against a semi-competent player, he probably shouldn't get involved just for the reasons that I was talking about. So again, those scare cards. To give you another example. Flop comes out 7 of clubs, deuce of diamonds, jack of diamonds. You've got pocket queens. Turns a 10. You bet. Or excuse me. Jack, deuce, 7 deuce, jack. Okay, 2 diamonds. You bet out with pocket queens. He calls you. Turns a 10. It completes 8, 9. I'm going to get a couple of different scenarios. Let's say you bet and he calls you again. Now the river is an ace. And actually, let's make that flop so that it doesn't have diamonds in it. Jack, deuce, 7 offsuit, turns a 10, river's an ace, so a draw doesn't really miss. Okay, no flush draws out there. Check, call, bet the river when an ace comes. Again, if the guy doesn't believe you and he's calling you down with a pocket pair because he puts you on ace king, why is he now betting the river? 8-9 again gets there on the turn. And he's got enough probably showdown. These guys at this level are not good enough to turn like pocket 8s into a bluff at the end by check calling 2 streets and then betting the river with an ace. Normally, you are no good. The same thing can be said too if it came, jack 7 deuce, guy check calls, turns a 10, okay? Now he comes out and leads at you and you call the turn. And now the river's an ace and he bets again. Because that ace is almost like a truth serum card. It makes your reads. Sometimes it's actually a good thing to have a card that looks like a scare card come out on the turn or come out on the river that should smack your pre-flop raising range. Because if weaker players continue to bet and they continue to show strength, it makes it easier to realize that your hand is no good. And again, here, queens, not a good hand. I mean, it's going to put yourself to a test if the river comes a deuce. And he bets again because now you beat jack 10. But if the river comes a 3 and he bets again, it's like, oh man, what is this guy betting with? But now that the river comes an ace or a king and he bets again, I think you can safely fold. You can safely fold the queens. I wrote up another example here. Let's say the board comes out 8-4-9 and the turn is a king. Okay, got checked around 3 ways. Now the turn's a king. Now somebody shows strength on the turn against the pre-flop raiser's bet by check raising or leading out on the king and then leading out for a second street on the river. Normally a king in that spot is not going to be good against typical competition. Which leads me to the last point, which I talked about last week, and this is some practical advice for it, is the fact that, let's say that in that hand that I used in the second example, that you were the guy that was out of position with jack 10. Let's say that you had jack 10 on a jack deuce 7 board, and the other guy had queens. You check called his flop bet. The turn's a 10, and now you lead with top 2 pair. And now he calls. Now the river's a 3. But this is a competent player, and he's good enough to realize that if you show another street of strength, that he might fold his queens. So you check call him for value because his range of value betting the river is much larger than his range of calling your bet on the river. So now you check the river, and he bets with queens, and you call, and you win with jack 10. I wouldn't get too confused with this concept at the lower levels because I'd probably just bet out because I would never want to use value. But lose value. But if you start playing against more advanced players, this is how you actually extract even more value. Same type of thing. You might even go so far as to say, on that last example that I used, 8, 4, 9, let's say you flopped a set of 4s, check the flop, you checked it back, you check raise the turn with an ace, or excuse me, you let out on the turn, and let's say this is, again, against very good competition, and he called, and then the river came like a deuce, or a 3, or something like that, and now you lead out big on the river again. A competent player, a lot of the time, is going to fold a hand like ace-queen. But if you actually check at the end, he might value bet ace-queen. So it's a wide variety of different patterns and just different interesting things. But those are a couple things that I wanted to go over this week. We're going to take a little break, and we will be back right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays. Previously on All Strategy with Negreanu, Bonomo, and Huff.
Now, when you're looking at online tournaments versus live, do you think that actually the most equatable tournament, and I just kind of came up with this as I was listening to you talk about it there, but if you're talking about you can play almost every hand when you're playing in the World Series of Poker main event because people are going to make big mistakes, is that somewhat equatable also to big field tournaments online where it seems like even though I know the level of play has advanced in online poker, and there are a lot of great poker players playing online, but let's say an $11 buy-in, no rebuy tournament, in an event like that, is it also very similar where you think you can loosen up early and get people to make big mistakes because you are likely to be up? If there's 3,500 people, they're not all pros. They're not all great.
I know you've got something to say this, but literally the one problem with that is generally in these tournaments they're not deep stacked enough. The only way you can really get away with playing every hand is if the amount you're investing in to see each flop is a very small percentage of your overall stack size. And you don't see many tournaments, especially smaller buy-ins, that play deep stack like that.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with the number of players is if you have an event like the World Series main event with, 8,000 players, there's just not that many good players in the world. So you're going to have many weaker players. And Daniel's definitely correct. Stack size is basic. There's two basic things that determine how you should play at the start of the tournament. Stack size and how strong the competition is. So, I mean, when we're talking about these $11 tournaments online, you just can't, call these raises with weak hands hoping to hit. Your implied odds just aren't there.
All Strategy. Listen and learn. Cash Plays.
Welcome back, everyone, to Cash Plays. Going to get into a few emails here. Again, the email address is cashplays@pokerroad.com. This email comes from Rudiger Stickler, and I'm sure I massacred that name, from Austria. He says, "Hey Bart, I have a question regarding big pairs. Suppose you 3-bet a pre-flop opener from the blinds with a big pocket pair like, say, Jacks plus. The flop comes with one overcard to your pair. I feel sometimes a bit lost in this situation. Do you make a bluff out of your hand by betting out? You'll rarely get value, and I think you'll also rarely make better hands fold. Thank you for the email, Rudiger." Well, that is a very, very good question. And obviously it depends. Different type. I'm going to give a couple of answers. One for maybe 10, 20 plus, and one for maybe like 5, 10 and below. I think for the lower level passive games, let's say you raise up with queens out of the blind, a guy calls you and the board comes out like king 9-3. There are a couple things that you can do. Against passive opponents, I think that you can actually gain a whole lot of information by checking, and if he checks back, knowing that your hand is good. Even against semi-aggressive opponents at these levels, if you check call one street, the guy normally shuts down, and these guys aren't good enough to check back the turn and bet for value on the river when the draw misses. Other times I tend to bet out with an overcard if the board is drawy. Again, let's say you've got jacks and the board comes out like queen 9-3 with 2 hearts. I think that smacks the range of this guy in the sense that he can have he can definitely have weaker hands that you can extract value from. So I'm going to bet out on a board like that. Whereas maybe like a queen 7 deuce board, I might not, like a dry queen 7 deuce board, I might not with the 2 jacks to play a little bit of pot control and maybe extract a little bit more value from a weaker hand, but just coming out and betting, you really can't get anything to call you that you have beat, and you're going to get everything worse to fold. When you start moving up against more aggressive opponents, I'm going to make a term up here. I don't know. Maybe you can get into common, and maybe I can get it into the poker mainstream. Sometimes I like to make a play with what I call the ante bluff, and I'll give you an example of that. And what that is let's say that you raise it up with pocket kings, and I'm going to give an example of this could actually be in position or out of position. Let's say that you're in position, because this is a little bit easier at first, and a guy calls you, and the board comes out ace 9 deuce. And you're in position, he checks to you, okay? You think to yourself, well, how can I bet here and not get called by, I can't really bet and extract any type of value from hands that I beat. I'm going to get everything weaker to fold. He can only call me with an ace, so I'm going to check it back. And again, that's not bad thinking, but when you're up against a semi-aggressive opponent, you actually might want to bluff there, to bet there to prevent your opponent from bluffing you on later streets, which is what I call the anti-bluff. Because if you check that back, you may be forced to call 2 big streets on the turn and on the river, and you have absolutely no idea of the strength of your opponent's hand. So what you're doing is you're betting a medium strength hand to prevent your opponent from turning his hand into a bluff. And Bart and people are like, well, wouldn't you want your opponents to turn the hand into a bluff? Yes, but there are certain situations where there just isn't enough information for you to evaluate if your opponent is bluffing. And if he's savvy enough and he can take you to two more value streets with like ace rag on a board like that, it's an absolute disaster. Same thing out of position there. You raise it with kings. Board comes out ace high. You might want to throw out a bet there to prevent yourself from getting bluffed. It's a unique situation with 2 kings in that spot because guys will float you at the higher levels. But checking is very, very weak, I think, and it just sometimes forces you to give up on the pot. Again, when you're playing at the lower levels, and you got pocket queens or pocket kings, and the board comes out like ace high or king high, and you check it over to them, a lot of guys will just check back if they miss. They play it straightforward. They think that you're checking top set, which of course you probably would never do if you're a good player. And if you call them one time, and again, this is kind of like the truth serum, because everybody plays bad at these lower levels. And say you've got jacks and the board comes out queen high, and you check call them on the flop. Queen 7 deuce. Automatically, they're going to think that you have 3 queens. So it takes a very, very skilled opponent, which I do not see at these levels, to fire multiple barrels with the bluff. So if he fires the turn again, it's relatively safe to say that you can fold your jacks. But again, this is really where it comes to paying attention and knowing your opponents. I don't mind a check call on one street, but you've got to realize and you've got to figure out what you're going to do on the turn if a second barrel is fired. And then on the rare case that the guy does check back the turn and bet the river, you've got to figure out what you're going to do as well. So again, kind of a long answer. Drawy boards with an overcard, I'm betting for value at the lower levels for sure. Non-drawy boards, I'm actually checking for information usually is my default line, Mr. Stickler. And once you get up to higher levels, against semi-aggressive opponents, you might put yourself in a spot where you're forced to anti-bluff. Thank you for that email. Moving on, Daniel Bridges, a Kiwi from Wellington, New Zealand. Says, Bart, I listened to your show last week and I thought it was great, but I find it hard to pay attention. Are there any methods you use to train yourself, i.e. note-taking, focusing on one player at a time, etc.? Well, Daniel, I'm sure that this is a common problem, especially people who migrate from the online game. And really, again, I talked a little bit about it last week. I think that you can, play with some music, but I would just try to not, I would try to lessen anything that possibly distract you. What I'm trying to do now is I'm trying not to watch the sports. Commerce, they've got a billion TVs with, football or baseball or whatever on. That distracts me. Sometimes the cocktail waitress distracts me. Yes, I'm Gus Hanson, but I'm serious. Friends distract me. I try to really cut all of that stuff out, and I really try to zone in. Maybe one of the things that you can do is kind of tell your friends, when I'm playing at the table, I don't really want to be bothered. I don't want to be an asshole about it, but I just, I'm really trying to work on my game. Again, I'm trying to zone in. And we talked about it last week. If you can sit there and for 5 straight hands start putting opponents on specific hands according to the betting action, I think you find yourself immersed within the game. And, people would say, well, 5 hands are nothing. Actually, I want to challenge everybody. Do it. Actually try to sit there and pay attention for 5 straight hands and say, okay, this guy bet the river. This guy called. We're going to see showdown here. What do I think these guys have? Because it might sound easy, but I guarantee you that there's a lot of you out there, and I hadn't done it before. I've actually never done it. You might not have even done it for 2 straight hands. So really, really sit down there, and you're going to be forced to take mental breaks, and that's okay. You're going to be sometimes going to have to, consciously not pay attention because it's just like, memory overload. But, it's almost like an organic feeling. When I know what other players are doing, I get a better feel for the table, and my game improves. So I hope that helps you out there, Daniel. Got an email here from Gene. He says, hey, Bart, let's say on the river you have ace high or king high, and you really feel that your opponent is bluffing, but you're afraid he might have caught a small pair and is turning that into a bluff. Is it better to call and hope he didn't catch a pair, or should you raise if you feel your hand isn't strong enough to bluff catch? Or just consider it a loss and fold? Very, very good question, Gene, because obviously I have made this mistake before. And, a lot of this has to do with stack sizes and, again, given action. But, I'm not a huge proponent at the lower levels of raising at the end with ace high or king high to avoid somebody, betting out with bottom pair as a bluff. Just because sometimes people find reasons to call you when it makes absolutely no sense. But the theory itself it is relatively sound. A lot of times ace high is going to have enough showdown value where you're going to call, but I actually have called with some ace highs and some king highs and lost to pairs. If you think that the given action of the hand with your king high might not be good, but the guy is bluffing, then obviously the correct play is to raise. Sometimes it's really not possible, though, because a guy might move all in. Let's say a guy's moved all in front of you. You're fairly sure that he's bluffing, but you can't, or let's say that you think he's bluffing maybe 60, 70% of the time, but the problem is that your hand strength might only be to bluff 60 or 70% of the time. Then, you got to look at pot odds, because a lot of times that computed, added together equates it to be a fold, because you're losing 30% of the time anyways. And when he is bluffing, you're also losing 30% of the time. So it's really close. You're going to have to look at pot odds and stuff. But, I know I do it sometimes. At the lower levels, it's pretty rare for a guy to actually turn his hand into a bluff with like a hand like bottom pair. So you don't have to worry about it all that much, and especially like top pair, the guy's never really going to turn that into a bluff. And again, it goes back to that whole thing about hand strength that we talked about in the beginning of the show. They don't realize that with the given action, even though they have top pair, there's no way it can be good. So the only way they could ever win the hand is actually turn their ace into a bluff. But normally you don't see that at this level. So it really becomes player and situational, dependent, Gene. I've definitely called guys down with ace high, and they're clearly bluffing, and they've got, a pair of fives, and I'm like, oh, what the hell? I just, it kind of irritates you because you say to yourself, well, I could have raised there. I could have raised and taken it down. But, maybe the guy's playing like a maniac. Maybe you don't want to spew off chips. You don't want to commit more chips to the hand. Because, if you look at it like this, like where ace high is going to be good a lot of the time as a bluff catcher, and you call, and the guy's range is polarized to monster or a bluff, and now he bets the river, and you're like, oh shit, well, you know what, I'm going to raise here, because I'm not 100% sure if I can catch off a bluff here with the ace high. The guy might be, bluffing with bottom pair. Now all of a sudden he has a monster, and now he re-raises you. It's like now he's turning off and, kind of chip spewing a little bit. Now, obviously you can kind of min raise, try to, you try to risk the least. But again, the problem with that is if you get yourself into like an overinflated pot and a guy has made like a bet at the end and you min raise him, and then all he's getting like 5 or 6 to 1, the real disaster is he calls you with a pair. I mean, most of these players just aren't competent. And, I don't want you to really fall into that trap either. So I hope that helps you out there, Gene. Thank you for the email. Last email of the day. This comes from Marcus. He says, hey, Bart, what do you look for when observing game selection? Is there anything that you can pick up right away? Well, this is really, really interesting because I love it how some guys come up to the 10-20 and they hop into a pot and they're like, action table. Obviously, there's a lot of chips in the pot. But at the higher levels, a lot of chips in the pot doesn't really necessarily mean it's a good game. It might be an action game, but there are a lot of laggy good players out there. When you're playing at the lower levels and all of a sudden you've seen 5 or 6 straight pots where the pots are pretty big, chances are that's a pretty good game. People are playing overly loose. I like to look at, and again, this comes from paying attention, if I'm at a totally unknown table, I actually like a tight nitty table. I like a weak, tightish table. And what I like to look at is, let's say that you raise it up pre-flop, like with a hand like ace queen, and the board comes out, 9 deuce deuce. Great board texture for you. And you bet out, and a guy just folds relatively quickly without thinking about it. That's the type of table I'd like to be at. And if I can, if I can look at 3 or 4 players and look at if they're never going to play back at me, or if they never even think about calling, when great board texture comes out, for me, I consider that a good game. And we've talked about what board texture is. High, low, low, king 4 deuce, 9 4 deuce, paired boards with less than 3 players in the hand. If they're not even going to think twice when the board comes out 10 10 3, you bet with like ace queen and they fold their pocket sevens, or they show you and they don't even think about it, or they're just going to fold their ace king. That's a game that I like to be at. So that's kind of one of the tricks of the trade that I use, is that when I continuation bet great board textures, do these guys give up relatively quickly? And if they do, I love that game, because they have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. There's no ability whatsoever for them to float. Again, paying attention is important, because you kind of have to watch what they do when the board comes out 9 9 3. You bet into 2 people. What are they doing with their pocket sixes? A lot of them will call once. Okay, so 9 9 3. I bet out with ace queen. They call. Okay. They're so tight, that they probably don't have a 3 in their hand. So they're playing their hand relatively face up. And unless they've flopped 9s full, they've got a pocket pair, most likely below 9s. Okay, now the turn's a queen or a king. You bet again, and now they just fold. They say, oh, I had you until the turn. The turn's a queen. You've bet with ace king, and you've bluffed them out of the hand. So at these levels, at 5-10, if you do have a strong handle for your game, and handle for picking up small pots with good board textures, I'm looking for weak, tightish tables, and I think you can tell right away. I mean, a bad game, people think, you sit down on a new table and all of a sudden, it gets chopped 3 or 4 times in a row. People are like, no action, no action. This is a horrible table. Not really, because tight weak means tight bad a lot of the times. So a guy, and again, don't want to be sexist, but a lot of, you know, when I see a woman playing no limit, my token thought in my head is to typecast them as a tight bad player, because that's what I see 99% of the time. You know, people have actually given me a whole lot of shit about this. They say, well, how can you group women into that category? Well, it's like grouping anybody else into the category. It's like grouping an old guy into the category. It's like grouping a guy who's Asian and is going on super tilt. You know, I've been playing for like 4 or 5 years, and these are the types of patterns that I've picked up at the table. And a lot of the times, people fall right into that pattern. You know, it's funny when I say that I've just seen a tendency where certain, you know, a lot of times, I'm not sure. My friend and I were actually talking about, I don't know if it was Korean or if it was Chinese or something. I was actually talking to a Chinese dealer about this, and he was telling me the same thing, is like, these guys just tilt like nuts. They play well, and then they just tilt, and then they're super gamblers. Obviously not all of them are like that, but it's a pattern that I've picked up like over 4 or 5 years. And I absolutely mean no offense to that community. Again, I'm just trying to help out with the question about observing at the table. With women, it tends to be weak tight, weak bad, where they're going to put some money in they're not going to play a lot of hands. And they're not really playing their hands aggressively post flop. And anytime you put heat on them and they give you heat back, you know that you're no good. So just because they're not giving a whole lot of action, when they are in hands, they play badly. And that's really what you want. And then in the meantime, you can pick up, small pots. Here, I'm going to typecast another group. It's the internet kid. Okay, now I've typecasted Asians, women, and now I'm going to typecast the internet kid with the baseball cap, who is not adjusting to the live game and is constantly 3-betting with a bunch of garbage with no fold equity. Now, I would probably not want to play against that kid. I'd rather play more against the other groups of players, because that tends to be more of a tight, aggressive style. But at the same time, if you're a good player and you know what this kid is doing, it's an easy counter with good board textures. To C-raise board textures, which should hit his pre-flop raising range. And they don't. And again, I don't think you should really be making moves at lower levels, but that's another group. The old man stuff, old men at the table usually falls into the tight bad, tight weak. Like if you see a guy over 70, 75, he's usually pretty weak tight. And anytime he's putting money in the pot, he's good. And I don't know if, it's interesting how guys like that fall into that style, because you wonder if as you get older, maybe you gain more patience and more patience for life. And, these guys just don't play a lot of hands. But again, they're not really tight aggressive. So I hope this helps you out with kind of observing the table and looking for game selection. At Commerce, when there's 8 5-10 games or 5-10 20 games and you don't know the player pool, really a lot of the times what you go by is you look at stack sizes and then you just look at the players. And a lot of times you're stereotyping them into age, race, sex, whatever. But the point is that, if you have a lot of experience, like I've had a lot of experience, if 85 or 90% of the time you can actually judge the players on their actual appearance, it actually gives you a good litmus test in terms of where you want to go in the games. I think Mike Caro talked about this in Caro Book of Tells. Like a guy who's super neat with his chips is all, really gonna be protective of his money, whereas a guy who's sloppy is kind of loose. I mean, that it's not always the case, but you might have a look at that. Go back and look at Caro's Book of Tells and check it out. I actually encourage people to do that. Maybe shoot me an email next week if they look at some of those tells in Caro's books and see if it's consistent with some of the things that you've observed at the table. With that, that's going to wrap things up for us today. Join us next week. Again, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I want to get the bear on the show. Going to make it happen. I don't think that there's a WPT event now for another month until the Doyle Brunson Classic in Vegas. So hopefully we can get that to work. And then when I do Barry, I think it's going to be a new two-parter. I got some pretty good response about the Simoleus two-parter. And, Barry Greenstein's just an absolute wealth of knowledge. So I'd love to have him on for more than just an hour. So that's going to do it for us. Thanks for joining me. We will see you next week.